my water just broke. I felt like things really intensified.
She was right there and she was coming.
It was an amazing feeling.
I'm going to cry just thinking about it. I could feel her head.
We heard her cry. We were squeezing hands and she was screaming.
I'm Bryn Hunt Palmer, and you're listening to The Birth Hour. This podcast is designed as a safe place to come together and share childbirth stories. Stick around and join us to hear informative and empowering birth journeys from all over the world. Today's episode is sponsored by NAPS, which stands for Newborn and Parenting Support. Founded by two labor and delivery nurses, NAPS offers evidence-based support from actual nurses. It's like having an expert best friend who's seen it all and has the answers to all of your questions, yes, even the 3 a.m. ones. NAPS's lactation consultants are experienced nurses ready to help you figure out feeding, whether you're breastfeeding, pumping, combo feeding, or just need some general guidance. From pregnancy prep to navigating life with a newborn and even through the toddler years, NAPS offers personalized support, workshops, and community to help you handle every, wait, is this normal moment with confidence. Head to nurturebynaps.com to learn more and start getting the guidance you deserve exactly when you need it. At the end of this episode, I chat with Jamie and Emily, the co-founders of NAPS, all about their offerings and what makes NAPS so unique. Okay, if you're new to the Birth Hour, you may not know that we have an online childbirth course that is evidence-based. It includes 12 modules that take you from your final weeks of pregnancy through obviously preparing for birth and then postpartum and feeding your baby as well. And with enrollment in that course, which is called Know Your Options, you'll get free access to our other course called Beyond the First Latch, where we talk all about pumping, feeding baby, storing milk, going back to paid work if that's part of your plan, all of those things as well. Okay, so if you go to thebirthhour.com/course, you can see everything laid out in the course, module by module, as well as an FAQ section, which will hopefully answer some of your questions if you have any, things like how to get it covered by an FSA account and things like that. It also talks about the bonuses that come with the course, including bi-monthly Zoom calls and access to our private Facebook group. So again, that's thebirthhour.com/course. And you can use the coupon code right now, 100OFF, for $100 off enrollment. We would also love to welcome you into our listener supporter group via Patreon. That's at patreon.com/birthhour. And by becoming a Patreon supporter, you get access to all of our archived episodes. This podcast launched in 2015, so we have over 800 episodes in the archives that are not in the main podcast feed. So you can get your fill of birth stories. And you'll also get access to our private Facebook group for Patreon members, which is a great place to honestly just to search the past posts to get answers to questions, but then of course to ask new questions, find community. It's a really, really great supportive group of people. So I highly recommend joining that. We would love to have you there. We also do monthly Zoom calls with our Patreon supporters, and you get an opportunity to enter your birth story via a different submission form than everyone else uses, and we choose 2 Patreon members each month to share their birth stories. So to sign up for yourself, head over to patreon.com/birthhour, and if you want to ask for it as a gift or gift it to someone else, you can do that at patreon.com/birthhour/gift, and you can do a whole year or month by month. It's a really great option for the holidays. All right, today's guest is Megan, and she has 2 birth stories to share with us, one hospital birth and one home birth, with 2 very different postpartum experiences. Let's hear from Megan. Hi, Megan. Welcome to the Birth Hour. Thank you for being here today.
Hi, Bryn. Thank you for having me.
Yes. Before we get to your stories, can you tell listeners a little bit about you and your family?
Sure. So my name is Megan. I live in upstate New York, just north of Albany, with my husband, Dan, and our 2 daughters, Emily, who just turned 5, and Olivia, who is 2.5. I'm a registered dietitian as well as a birth and postpartum doula. I enjoy incorporating my nutrition background while pursuing my passion for birth work, which I felt called to after the birth of my first baby. So I'm excited to share my stories today.
Yeah. All right. Well, we're going to hear both stories. So why don't you just start us off with finding out you were pregnant with your first and how your pregnancy went?
Okay. So I found out I was pregnant with Emily on New Year's Eve of 2018. We were living on Long Island at the time, and it was just after Christmas. I remember we had gotten a couple of nice bottles of wine, but I was waiting to see if I got my period before I opened one. So my husband was working late one night, and I started getting symptoms of like PMS and that I was going to start my period. I was just crampy. My boobs were sore. And then I started getting some spotting and light bleeding. So I was feeling pretty discouraged. We've been trying for a few months now to get pregnant. So I was like, fine, I'm just going to open this bottle of wine and drink my sorrows away. So I had that light bleeding for probably 2 to 3 days. But it was a little different than like my normal period. It was very light and just almost like this brown blood. So I also noticed like my boobs still hurt after the bleeding stopped. So I thought that was a little weird. I decided to take a pregnancy test and found out it was positive. So that was pretty surprising, but also very exciting. I immediately called my OB, who I'd been seeing for just my routine annual care, and was kind of shocked when they said that they wouldn't see me until I was 9 weeks. I didn't really know what to do with myself until then. I let them know I was still having some spotting and cramping, but they said unless it picked up, it would probably be fine and that they'd see me at 9 weeks. So we did eventually go to that 9-week visit. Everything looked good. We saw the heartbeat. Everything was normal, but I still continued to have like that spotting. And it happened right around when I would have gotten my period again. So I'm not sure if it was hormonal or what it was, but that was the last time it happened. And everything from there out was pretty normal. I did continue to see that OB practice, but I wasn't a real fan of them. They kind of didn't really give much informed consent when they were doing things. Remember they ordered genetic testing, even though I wasn't even 30 yet at the time, but they just said it was what they did. And I didn't realize like it wasn't covered by my insurance until I got the bill a few weeks later.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah, that was an unpleasant surprise. And the results actually came back inconclusive, which was pretty like concerning to me because I didn't know much at that point. They recommended I go see a genetic counselor. And that was just a scary appointment. They were talking about all sorts of things that could go wrong and if I should do an amniocentesis. And it was very overwhelming, and I didn't feel comfortable enough like announcing my pregnancy until I knew what was going on. So we did agree to do like an early anatomy scan around 17 weeks, and everything looked fine. It ended up being just an issue with the genetic testing itself. So everything looked good, and we felt comfortable like announcing everything. But I just kind of had a bad taste in my mouth from that experience and started doing more of my own research. I started just listening to pregnancy podcasts, reading a lot of books. I had a pretty long commute to work, like an hour each way. So I would just listen to as many podcasts as I could and started to feel more drawn to planning an unmedicated birth. I just really was fascinated with birth in general. I had no, background information at all to go off of. I knew my mom had had 2 unmedicated hospital births, but that's really all I knew. So I just really enjoyed learning more about it. I'm a researcher, so I just became kind of obsessed with it.
I can relate.
So I continued to see my OB, and I brought up that I wanted to do an unmedicated birth. And the nurse practitioner I saw that day told me that, our hospital has over a 30% C-section rate, so I wouldn't be too set in your plan. She was just pretty dismissive overall. So I really just left kind of in tears, like fed up with that office. I knew I didn't really want to continue with them. But I also knew that we were planning to move upstate just to be closer to family and that I probably wouldn't end up delivering with them anyway. So I just continued to do my own research and go with the flow. So as I said, we were planning to move upstate. My husband, Dan, took a new job, which required pretty extensive travel. So he was gone actually for most of my pregnancy. He was in Australia. I remember he did 3 trips to Australia. So he was gone for weeks at a time. So a lot of like the house hunting and house buying and everything fell on me, which was a little stressful, but we did eventually find a house and were able to close on it by the end of June. and I was due on September 8th. So we moved in July. I was probably 30 weeks pregnant at that point. And I knew I wanted to switch to a midwife. From all my research, I knew that the midwifery model of care really resonated with me. I actually really wanted home birth, but Dan was not on board at that point, especially it being our first baby and all. So I settled and we went with a midwifery group who worked in an OBGYN office right up the road. And it was honestly just a breath of fresh air when I had my first appointment with them. I was 32 weeks and they took the time just to answer all my questions. They were on board with all of my birth preferences. And I left feeling just this huge weight off my shoulders, like comfortable finally to go through labor. I was actually really excited about it. And there were 5 midwives in the practice, so I got to meet all of them in the weeks leading up to my birth, which was nice. So at that point, I had left my job and really was able to just focus on my pregnancy. I was doing a lot of cleaning, gardening, setting up the house. So I was on hands and knees a lot. I was very active, walking our dog multiple times a day. And that's when I found the birth hour. I started listening to just multiple stories every day on those walks and started getting really excited. So I heard a lot of guests talking about researching breastfeeding because that was often, they overlooked it. So I really made sure to focus on that. I read The Womanly Art of Breastfeeding and took an online course. So I just felt better prepared for that. I didn't take any separate childbirth education. I did like the typical hospital class, but I felt pretty confident just from all of my own research. But what I did do was I hired a doula around 34 weeks. I was kind of late to the game. They book up quick. So I was lucky I found her, but I really connected with her. She just felt like an old friend and had a great sense of humor. And I thought it would be more helpful for Dan, honestly, than for me, but she ended up just being such a great resource for us both.
Awesome. Okay, so it sounds like you did a lot of preparation and we're ready. So let's go ahead and talk about how labor started for you.
Okay. So my due date came and went. I was having pretty intense Braxton Hicks contractions throughout my 3rd trimester. Some days I would get cramping. It just kind of felt like period cramps and they would come and go and just fizzle out. It was mostly at night, which was kind of annoying because I wasn't getting much sleep. But I just kind of continued on life as normal. I saw my midwives at 40 weeks and was kind of debating asking for a membrane sweep because I was getting pretty impatient, but my midwife was great. She said, I'm not even going to offer to check your cervix. Your body's doing what it needs to do. It's normal to go over. I just want you to focus on relaxing and kind of taking your mind off it. So I went home and was just doing the mile circuit every night. I was scheduled for an ultrasound and non-stress tests at my 41-week appointment if I made it then. So the night before that appointment, I started getting a little anxious. I remember I ate an entire bag of dates because I thought that would help me somehow. And I went to bed just feeling really nervous about the possibility of an induction and just how that would mess with my plans for an unmedicated birth. But I kind of decided at that point, like, to just let it go. What would be. And if I had to be induced, it would be okay. Like everything would work out. And that is when my labor story starts. So that night, it was the morning of September 16th. I woke up at 3 a.m. with period cramps, which was pretty common at that point. So they were definitely noticeable enough, though, that they were keeping me up. So I went out to the living room just to read for a bit, try and distract myself and go back to sleep. But I noticed that they were coming more intense at times, and I started timing them, and they were about every 10 minutes coming on pretty consistently. So I got pretty excited. I didn't want to wake up Dan because I wanted at least one of us to be well rested. So I just stayed out in the living room until he woke up around 7 a.m. and I told him what was going on. And he asked if he had time, to wrap up some work things and take a shower. And I told him, of course, it's still early, so it's probably going to be a while. And right when I said that, he got in the shower and they started picking up pretty quickly. They went to every 7 minutes and then every 5 minutes and were getting more intense. So I was like, oh, maybe I should call the midwives and let them know what's going on. So around 8:30, I was sitting on the birth ball and called the midwives. And as I was talking to her, I felt this little gush, almost like when you have your period and it's like a gush of blood. It was very small, but definitely noticeable. And so I said, I think my water broke. So she told me to go to the bathroom and kind of tell her what I saw. And it was like a little bit of liquid. It was kind of hard to tell the color of it because it was kind of mixed with some blood and brown discharge. I didn't really know what was coming out. So she said, okay, great. Contractions will probably start to pick up a little more now. We'll check in with you around 11 o'clock, but you're also set to come in. I already had that appointment for the non-stress test and ultrasound set up that day. So she said, if things get more intense, go to labor and delivery. Otherwise, we'll see you at your appointment at 1:30. And so I said, great. I hung up. We had just a nice morning at home. I was kind of cleaning, distracting myself. We took the dog for a nice long walk. Contractions were still every 4 to 5 minutes. And Dan was actually kind of nervous. He said, we've been at the 5-1-1 rule for a while now, but like they weren't so intense that I couldn't not talk through them. So I said, like, it's probably fine. Still probably really early. So the midwife called at around 11 just to check in and said that she'd see us at our appointment later. And around 1:30, we went in for that. And she offered to do a pelvic exam just to see if my water had actually broken and do a cervical check, which I agreed to. And it did. She did say like there was some meconium in there, which I wasn't surprised because I was over 41 weeks at that point. So I didn't really feel concerned about it. And she did the cervical check at that point. That's what was most shocking to me, honestly. It was very painful. I pretty much almost jumped off the table. But I was 1 centimeter and 80% effaced. And I felt pretty good about that. I knew that it was still really early and my body was having consistent contractions. It was getting steadily more intense. So I wasn't too concerned. But it did kind of mess with my headspace, like the cervical check and just how painful it was. I was kind of questioning if I can't even handle a cervical check, how am I going to handle an unmedicated birth? And I was feeling really nervous about that. But I ended up having the ultrasound done and that looked good. And then I did the non-stress test, which I had never done before. I didn't really know what to expect, but it was basically they just put 2 monitors on my belly and tracked baby's heart rate and my contractions. And it was cool getting to see the contractions on the monitor when I was having them. And they also gave me a button to press whenever I felt the baby move. Unfortunately, I was having so many contractions, my belly just felt rock hard and I couldn't really feel her moving that much. They gave me some juice to try and get her to move, but I couldn't feel anything. So that also the fact that she didn't really have much variability in her heart rate. The midwife didn't feel comfortable sending me home to keep laboring. She recommended that I check into labor and delivery, which was kind of disappointing because I knew I was only 1 centimeter and I had wanted to labor at home for as long as possible. But we agreed. I called my doula and kind of let her know what was going on. And then before we left, the midwife was like, okay, we'll get you all checked in and then we'll start some Pitocin. And she just said it very like nonchalantly, but it kind of startled me because I was like, whoa, I'm planning an unmedicated birth. I didn't want any interventions. I'm having consistent contractions. Like, I don't want to do that at all. So she said, okay, I'm going to finish up in the office. You go get checked in. I'll come check in around 5 o'clock and we'll do another cervical check. We'll see what's going on. So I agreed to that. We just headed over next door to the hospital, got checked in. And she came over around 5 o'clock and did another cervical check, which wasn't as painful this time, which was a big relief. And I was 2 centimeters, 90% effaced, and baby was at a 0 station. So I was a little discouraged, but they said, no, that's great progress. You're progressing. She was like, you can get off the monitors. They've been monitoring me for a little while. She said everything looked good. So I could walk around, I could eat and drink. And I just felt a little better about things, knowing that, okay, she's on board with my original birth plan. So she said that she was going to head home because it was probably going to be a while. The triage midwife would be monitoring me throughout the night. She did discuss some pain management options. I knew I didn't want an epidural, but she said if it was getting later into the evening and I still wasn't progressed much, she recommended therapeutic rest just to help me get some rest overnight. So I said I would consider it, but honestly, I felt pretty good and energized and excited. So I didn't think too much of it. And at that point, it was around 6:00 and my doula arrived, which gave Dan a chance to go grab dinner and take care of our dog, kind of get things settled at home, which was nice. So we just walked the halls for a bit, which I really found helpful, honestly, just being on my feet. I couldn't sit down. I think she was just so low in my pelvis that every time I sat and had a contraction, it was just excruciating. So using like the bathroom was awful. So I really wanted to be on my feet. And I was still having those contractions every like 3 to 4 minutes. They were picking up in intensity. I remember I would have every few contractions, like a really intense one, which I would vomit through. But that was a good thing because I knew I was progressing. So Dan came back around, I would say like 7:30 or 8. And at that point, things were really picking up. So my doula recommended that I try the shower, which I was excited about. But unfortunately, the shower in my room was broken. Like it was just a handheld shower. I couldn't like put it up on the wall. So I was just kind of kneeling in the tub while they like ran water over my back, which wasn't ideal, but it was better than nothing. And at that point, I was vocalizing pretty strongly through contractions. I had read Ina May's Guide to Childbirth and remember her saying like that could be really helpful. So I was just making a lot of like low moaning and mooing sounds. And I was actually pretty loud. I was surprised at how loud I was. And I remember having the distinct thought of, I get why people get the epidural now. Like I didn't want it, but I was like, I get it now. But I never felt scared or anything. I was always just kind of going with the flow and enjoying labor. But at that point, I started feeling a little, I guess, not panicky, but things were getting more intense and I felt like I needed to do something. So I got out of the tub and I was kind of like, I want to try, I think it was nitrous oxide the hospital offered, and I was interested in trying that. But the midwife wanted to see how far along I was, just to see like if I qualified for what pain management options, whatever it was. So my doula asked me, do you want to get checked? And I said no. And she asked me why. And I was like, because I know I'm only a 4. I just kind of knew in my mind that's where I was at. But we did the cervical check, and sure enough, I was at a 4. But I was 100% effaced and baby was still super low. She was now at like a +1, +2 station. So like really low down. And the midwife said that's why I was feeling like such intense contractions. And she actually told me that I was vocalizing too much and that like my cervix wouldn't dilate if I continued to do that. And I remember feeling really annoyed with her because in my mind, I was like, I'm coping just fine, like go away. But she said that I just kind of disregarded it and was off in labor land at that point. So they said that we could do the nitrous oxide. I remember the nurse was asking me a bunch of questions they had to do, I guess, before they could administer it. And one of them was, they asked if I was a vegan and I said no. And why? And they said, well, if you have a B12 deficiency, like we can't give you the nitrous. And being a dietitian, I thought that was really interesting. So I was thinking about that. So they finished everything and kind of left, and then they never came back with the nitrous. They instead recommended that I do the therapeutic rest, which my midwife had talked about earlier. And that would involve getting a shot of morphine and taking Visceral, which is kind of like an antihistamine similar to Benadryl. So I was a little confused, but again, I was kind of off in labor land at this point and wasn't able to ask many questions. I did ask if the morphine would pass to the baby because I was pretty concerned about that. I remember during our hospital course, they said that that would happen. They had talked about Nubane and this was morphine and I didn't know the difference. So they said, no, it wouldn't pass over to the baby, which I now know is not true. But because they said that, I agreed to it. So this was probably around 10 p.m. They gave me the Visceral and the morphine. And recommended that I get in bed and try and get some sleep. But at this point, I now know I was going through transition. I was having contractions every 2 minutes. They were very intense. And now with the morphine, I wasn't able to focus and kind of cope through them as I had been. I just felt drunk and I still felt everything. So it was pretty awful. I wasn't able to communicate really well. And I was just like sitting there in bed trying to rest, but not able to. I was basically just shaking, puking, having all the symptoms of transition. But the nurses kind of left at that point and were like, try and get some sleep. So quickly I realized like sleep was not happening. So I just got on hands and knees because that's the only thing that felt tolerable. Because at that point I started feeling this intense pressure like in my butt. And I was screaming like, I'm going to poop, like just all these like classic signs that I probably needed to push. But every time the nurse came in, she said, no, you were just checked. I hadn't even been an hour ago. She's like, you were only a 4. If you push now, you're going to swell your cervix. You just have to, fight through it. And that was pretty much impossible to do because my body was just kind of pushing on its own. But I was trying to do like horse lips, anything just to kind of get through it. But for about an hour, I would say I was doing that, just like screaming that my butt was falling out. My husband still like jokes to me. He's like, you were just screaming about your butt for like 2 hours. And even my parents were in the waiting room, which is a good distance from the labor wing. It's like out a sealed door and down the hallway. And they're like, yeah, we could hear you screaming about your butt.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So finally, my husband was like, this is ridiculous. Like, I'm going to go get the nurse. And she came in and she's like, okay, I'm going to check and see what's going on. And like, she barely got her fingers in to do the check. And she's like, oh, baby's head is right there. So I basically went from a 4 to a 10 in like less than 2 hours. And I just had the morphine, which I was a little concerned about. I was still kind of out of it, but with it enough to be able to push at least. So the triage midwife like rushed in and she's like, okay, it's time to start pushing. And I just felt like immediately relieved. And she's like, your midwife might not make it back in time. Is that okay? And at that point I was like, I don't care. Anyone can catch this baby. I just want her out. So they did roll me on my back, which looking back, I regret because I had been in hands and knees and was just like feeling the urge to push. Like I felt good in that position. But once they rolled me on my back, things kind of slowed down. And it was nice because I was able to focus on pushing, but also like wasn't great for actually pushing her out. Pushing in total, it ended up being about 45 minutes. And I didn't want any coach pushing. I knew that. So everyone was just kind of letting me do my own thing. At one point, I asked for a mirror because I was getting a little frustrated that things weren't going quickly. But every time I pushed, I would close my eyes like so tight that like I couldn't even see in the mirror. So it didn't make much of a difference. I was just getting frustrated because I would see her head and I felt like, okay, I'll just give it one more push and she'll come out. And I would open my eyes and see that she had gone back in and just feel so frustrated. But finally, I remember feeling the ring of fire and screaming it, going, ring of fire, ring of fire. And she came out at 12:54. So she went right to my chest. They did have respiratory therapists in there just because of the meconium, but there were no issues and they left pretty quickly. And it was just this amazing birth high. I felt incredible. I looked at my husband and said, I feel like Superwoman. I want to do that again. That was amazing. Yeah. And, the immediate postpartum was pretty good. I didn't even feel like the placenta get delivered. I was just like in my own little world. They did ask if I wanted Pitocin just to help with preventing any hemorrhage. And I said, sure, that's fine. So I got a shot of Pitocin. And I did end up having a small first-degree tear, but I tore up towards my urethra, which I did not know was a thing. So I didn't even really know. I didn't feel the stitches or anything. I only knew what had happened when my midwife said, okay, catheter's out. And I said, catheter. And she said, yeah, I had to put one in to do your stitches. But I didn't even feel it, honestly. And I'm glad she didn't tell me because that was one of my biggest fears was getting a catheter. That's why I also didn't want an epidural. Like for some reason, the catheter freaked me out. So I'm glad she didn't tell me about that. But yeah, that was Emily's birth.
All right. So how was your postpartum?
So immediate postpartum was great. I physically felt really well. It was more so the long-term postpartum that was difficult. Emily was a very colicky baby. And by colicky, I mean she basically screamed all day, every day, until she was well over a year old. So, I mean, I could do a whole episode on her postpartum, but it was pretty difficult. She ended up having a milk and soy protein allergy. I ended up doing an entire elimination diet because I just needed to know like what was making her so upset. But it was difficult. I couldn't really go anywhere with her just because she would just scream. So I didn't really go to any like new moms groups or breastfeeding groups. I just felt too self-conscious to do that. So it was pretty isolating.
Oh, yeah.
And finally, when she started sleeping through the night around 6 months, we did sleep training. And that helped a lot because at least I knew I was able to get a reprieve at night and some time to myself. So that was a major turning point in her postpartum. Unfortunately, right at that mark, that's when COVID happened. So any chance I had of like going out to moms groups and meeting people was pretty quickly squashed at that point.
Oh, no. Yeah, such a hard time.
But that pretty much leads into, I guess, Olivia's story.
Okay, let's hear about her birth.
Okay, so when Emily was 18 months old, I was back to working part-time. I was working in a nursing home. She was finally like able to spend time with the grandparents on days that I was working, and we just felt pretty settled. So I wanted to have another baby, and Dan was not really on board. He was pretty scarred from Emily's postpartum experience and was really hesitant to have another baby. So it took a few months for us to kind of discuss things and decide that we were ready to have another. But we started trying to conceive in the summer of 2021. And when we had started, New York State had come out with a vaccine mandate for COVID for all healthcare workers. But they were offering exemptions for people who were trying to conceive or who were pregnant. So I wasn't too concerned. The mandate deadline was for September. So in August, I was waiting to see if I was going to get my period. I was again in that in-between stage between ovulation and waiting for my period. And then that's when they announced that the state had rescinded the exemption for people who were pregnant or trying to conceive. So I kind of panicked and was like, okay, I hope I'm not pregnant this month because I wanted to wait a few months after getting vaccinated to try again. But of course, the universe did not listen to me. And the following week I tested and it was positive. So I called the midwife office, the ones who I'd been seeing for my first pregnancy, and kind of let them know what was going on. And they explained like they couldn't write me an exemption, that there was really nothing they could do. So I was kind of in a tough spot, whether I was going to get vaccinated in my first trimester or leave my job. It was pretty stressful and just unfortunate because it went from being like something that should have been like an exciting and joyous time to just a time where I felt kind of helplessness, that no one was really listening to me. I was, I was like, I'll get vaccinated in my second or third trimester. I just want to wait. And again, they were just not offering any exemptions. So, I think I was 7 or 8 weeks pregnant at that time. But I knew I just came out of that experience knowing I never wanted to feel that same feeling of helplessness, and especially when it came to my birth. So I did end up seeing the midwives again in that same practice for my first few appointments. But I found out that they were actually leaving the practice. There were a lot of disagreements between them and the OBs and the hospital and policies. So they were slowly being phased out and weren't even attending births anymore. So that kind of solidified my decision to change providers. And at that point, I had been kind of dipping my toes in the doula world. I was very interested in becoming a doula, so I had been attending some local doula meetups. And when I was 12 weeks, I went to a meeting and there were a couple of home birth midwives who were there. And they said, why don't you set up a consult with us? Have you considered a home birth? And I really did want to do a home birth. Again, Dan was just not on board with it. So they told me to set up a consult with them and have him ask any questions, maybe relieve some of his anxieties about it. So we did that, and Dan was still pretty unconvinced. One of the midwives who was there, her name was Tisha. She was great. I remember we were talking about like my first birth, and I said, "Oh yeah, that midwife delivered my baby." And she looked at me and she said, "No, Megan, you delivered your baby." And that was just such a profound like statement to me. And I remember just looking at her being like, I need to have you at my birth.
Yeah.
So we did our consult with her, and Dan still wasn't on board. So she actually recommended we talk to another home birth midwife who might be able to, convince him. So we did that, and she was great as well. But Dan was he's just a stubborn Taurus. He's very set in his ways. At that point, I just said, this is what I want to do, and I'm doing it whether you are on board or not. So at that point, he agreed, and we decided to move forward working with the home birth midwives. Honestly, I felt really lucky that we got in with them. They book up really quick around here as well. Like you have to pee on a stick and call them immediately. I think because I name dropped Tisha, like I was able to get in. So I started seeing them when I was 20 weeks pregnant, and just the night and day difference in the care I received was just amazing. I used to leave my appointments with like my first OB in tears because I was just so nervous and anxious and felt unheard. But when I would leave appointments with my midwife, I was also in tears, but just because I felt so grateful to be getting the care I was getting. We would just talk for over an hour just about nutrition and remedies, and mostly about my emotional state, because I felt prepared for the birth itself, but I was really nervous about going from one child to two. Just given how difficult Emily's postpartum was, I was like, I don't know if I can do that again, especially with a toddler. So they were just so reassuring about talking that through with me, and just really just being the support that I needed during that time. So it was amazing, just my prenatal care.
Good.
So I had planned on working up until my due date, which was April 29th. I was getting over being sick because my daughter had been bringing home all sorts of germs. So I had this pulled round ligament. I couldn't breathe through my nose. They were like, yeah, you're probably not going to go into labor anytime soon until your body feels better. So I was still kind of in denial that I was even going to have a baby at that point. My midwife did prescribe me some Vistaril, just I could take it if I was having trouble sleeping, or if my labor started, my water broke and I wasn't having contractions yet. She said I could take it just to try and get some sleep. She gave me that prescription, and I left expecting not to see her for another week. She gave me information to schedule an ultrasound and a non-stress test for my 41-week mark. And then that kind of leads up to my birth story. So the next day was Saturday, and it was pretty uneventful. I did get this extreme urge to start cleaning and nesting. So I scrubbed our bathroom, like every inch of it. And afterwards, I kind of noticed that I had a cough, and I didn't think much of it. I thought I had just like breathed in some mold or something while I was cleaning, because I'm pretty sensitive to that. So I thought it was allergies. So I didn't think much of it. That night, we were watching TV on the couch, and around 10 p.m., we were starting to head upstairs, and I just felt this rip. It wasn't a pop. It was almost like a rip. And that was right where I'd felt that round ligament pain. And I immediately knew that it was my water. So I ran to the bathroom, and fluid was just kind of pouring out of me. And it was a very surreal moment, because I had had no signs of labor up until that point. And all of a sudden there was just like fluid coming out of me. And that denial mode that I had kind of been in, that I was even going to have a baby, was all of a sudden, it just became very real. And I had a slight panic attack sitting there on the toilet. I told my husband, like, I'm not ready. This can't be happening. But he was great in that moment. And he just was like, you've got this. Everything's going to be fine. You know, we've got this. So I called my midwife and let her know that my water had broken. And she was pretty surprised too. And she was like, "Did you fill that prescription I gave you?" And I said, "No, because I wasn't going to have a baby for another week." But she was like, "Okay, why don't I have a 24-hour pharmacy near us?" So she's like, "Why don't you have Dan go fill that? And, just try and relax, try and get some sleep tonight, and I'll check in the morning." So Dan left to go fill it. And then I went up and took a shower and just kind of got in like a mental headspace and prepared myself like, okay, this is happening. You're having a baby. And I felt a little better when he got home. So yeah, I tried to get some sleep that night. It was pretty broken. I did start feeling contractions, but they were every like 15 or 20 minutes. It would just wake me up and then I would go back to sleep in between. So we woke up the next morning and woke up my daughter. She was going to go spend the night with my parents along with our dog. And I thought I was going to have this like heartfelt farewell to her as, being my first baby and all, but she was still getting over being sick and was kind of cranky. And I was just like over it and like, here, go to your grandparents. So sent her off. And then the house was quiet and I just really felt like I was able to relax. So Dan actually started doing more nesting and was like going food shopping and preparing meals and cleaning. And he was like making brownies. And I was like, this is great. I should go into labor every day. He made me a bacon, egg, and cheese for breakfast. And so I had a good breakfast. I called my midwife. It was around like 9:30. And just let her know, contractions still were very far apart. It was still very early. So she said to take another Visceral and try and get some more sleep. And it was great. I was like, is there a timeline, like a deadline? Like, should I, be moving and trying to get things going? And she said, no, your body's going to go into labor. You should really focus on resting, which was really reassuring. So I tried to get a little more sleep, woke up around 12:30. And I had taken a doula training when I was pregnant this time. And my trainer and good friend was actually going to be my doula at this birth. So I was in contact with her and kind of letting her know what was going on during this time as well. So my midwife checked in with me around like 1:30. And my husband actually answered the phone because I was having a contraction. And she was like, I'm going to send over Tisha just because, it's been a while and we want to see how things are going. Things were starting to pick up at this point. Contractions were coming like every 7 minutes. So I was fine with that. So Tisha and my doula both came over around 3:00. And it was great. I was just in my bedroom kind of doing my own thing. Tisha would check the heart rate every like half hour or so. I was in and out of the shower. Contractions were now coming like every 5 minutes and getting more intense. I was feeling them pretty much all in my cervix, which I thought was interesting. I think just because my water had been broken for so long and like the baby was super low, I just felt contractions like in my thighs and my cervix. But again, the labor was pretty straightforward. Like I really didn't feel pain. It was just more intensity. So I did a lot of laboring on the toilet this time, which was not comfortable, but I knew was like just the position I needed to be in. And right around like 5:00, Tisha said, why don't we call your midwife? Like sounds like you're picking up. I was vocalizing pretty strongly. And she recommended that we have everyone come over. I said, sure, that's fine. And my midwife had actually texted and said she was on the way. She just had a feeling like she knew things were pretty close. So she arrived probably around 5:30. And at that point, I was feeling like definite signs of transition. I was getting shaky and hot and kind of nauseous. And I just kind of knew that's where things were headed. So my midwife did offer to check me at that point if I wanted to, but I declined just because I knew things were pretty close. So at that point, I headed back into the bedroom, and we had just a really nice atmosphere going. My doula had set out candles. It was very like dim lighting, and we had a playlist going of just like classic rock songs, but it kind of set the mood nicely. It was more of like an emotional labor for me, whereas my first, I was more off in labor land. This one, I just felt much more lucid and like aware of what was going on, but emotionally way more like a song started playing. It was the song that me and my dad danced to at my wedding. And I just kind of was envisioning Dan dancing with our two daughters at their weddings. And I just was like crying, but they were good tears. So it was way more like spiritual, I guess, in that aspect. So I started feeling like grunty at the end of contractions and like I was going to need to push. But I was nervous to push because I remember I did not like it during my first birth and was kind of scared to do it again. So I was kind of resisting it. And then I finally started pushing like for real and giving it my all. I started out on hands and knees in the bed, but that didn't feel right. So I tried side lying, but that didn't feel right either. So I decided I was going to stand. So I was kind of leaning over the bed, standing. And the midwives were great. They would just put Chuck's pads. Like whenever I moved, they would just put them under me and we're kind of going with what my body needed to do. So I've been pushing for maybe like 10 or 15 minutes. And I could tell like something was holding it up. My midwife asked if during a contraction, if she could kind of check and see what was going on. And I agreed. So she checked and she said, yeah, you have a little bit of a cervical lip. I can push it aside during this contraction. And I said, yeah, just do it. So she did, which it was very intense, but it definitely helped because on the next push, I felt things start to progress. Like I felt her moving down. So I was also getting frustrated with pushing this time because my husband kept saying like, I can almost see her head, but I was just feeling such intense pressure. Like, I was like, what do you mean you almost see it? Isn't her head out already? Like, it just felt so intense. And as I was pushing, I just had a very like out of body experience where I just felt myself kind of leaving my body. And like, I was looking down at everything and almost like on this veil between life and death almost. I said, I'm either like going to push out this baby or I'm going to die. There was like no in between. So it was a very bizarre feeling, but also really cool. So I could hear myself kind of screaming and being like, oh, that sounds awful. Like, I'm glad my daughter's not here. And like, I feel sorry for Dan because I was just like shrieking in his ear. But in my mind, I was like completely calm. So it was this weird like dichotomy. And I remember the playlist was still going and there was this song, The Beatles, All My Life came on. And I just kind of was really quiet. And on that next push, gave it my all. And I felt her head come out. And my midwife said, okay, great. The head's out. You know, you can wait until your next contraction to push your body out. And I just said no and just gave another push and she flew out. And yeah, that was just like an immediate feeling of relief, first and foremost. And then they kind of passed her up to me. And I was holding her against my chest. And when I looked at her, my first thought was that something was wrong just because she was so small and like wrinkled. She looked like this little lizard person. And I was like, is she okay? And everyone's like, yeah, she's perfect. She's just a newborn. But I guess I forgot how small they are. But she ended up being 6 pounds, 15 ounces, which was pretty much the same as Emily was. And the immediate postpartum was great. Like I just went right into bed. The placenta came out really quickly after that. I had like a minimal tear, but it didn't need stitches. So yeah, we just got to kind of cuddle up in bed and do our golden hour. After that, midwives came back in. I got to shower, get all cleaned up, and then they tucked us in again and headed out probably around like 10 o'clock. So it was weird. It felt like just a normal day, except I had a baby.
Oh, I love that ending. I love the way you described it. And yeah, it is always a little bit of a shock. Like, wait, you're just leaving me here with this baby? Okay, so different postpartum this time?
Little bit.
I'm hoping for you.
It was actually a redemptive postpartum.
Okay, good.
Yeah, the immediate postpartum, the minute the midwives left, Dan came back into the room and looked really pale and was shaky and was like, I don't feel well. And I'm like, what do you mean you don't feel well? I just pushed out a baby. He's like, no, I feel sick. And I was like, oh no. So he pretty much went downstairs. He made me dinner and then went downstairs and passed out on the couch. And the next morning he woke up and was still feverish and was like, yeah, I'm sick. I don't think I should come upstairs. So I called my mom and told her to bring Emily back over and asked if she could bring some COVID tests because she had some. And sure enough, Dan tested positive. So I called my midwife and kind of told her what was going on. I was like, should I isolate? Like, what should I do? And then I remembered I had this cough that I'd had since the day before. And I'm like, you know what? Let me take a test. And I did, and it was positive.
Oh, no.
So ended up we both had COVID, and I was kind of concerned at first, but then I wasn't because I had pretty mild symptoms and I knew I was breastfeeding. So I wasn't too concerned about Olivia. So my parents came over, dropped off Emily, and we started our postpartum, but it kind of put a damper on my postpartum plans. I'd planned to have my parents taking care of Emily and really having Dan take care of me so that I could focus on my own recovery. But unfortunately, he was kind of sidelined for a week, just trying to feel better. So that was a little difficult. But after that, he was great. He took care of Emily, and I was really able to focus on resting. Olivia was just a completely different baby. She was so chill. I was able to just like put her down and like walk away. And I was amazed. I'm like, oh, this is why people have babies. So it was night and day. Mood wise, I felt just so stable. Like I didn't have any mood swings. I really loved my postpartum with her. The midwives came and did home visits on day 1, day 3, day 7, at 2 weeks and 6 weeks. So I got like amazing postpartum care from them. It was nice not having to like haul a newborn out to go to the pediatrician because they also did checks for the baby as well. So I really got to just kind of hunker down. And I think it made a big difference too, having a spring baby. I was able to really enjoy the weather. And like once I was feeling well enough, I was able to take Emily to the park and just, bring Olivia along. She was just a really pleasant baby. So it made things so much easier.
That's so good. Yeah, that's a little bit of a stressful start with your partner being sick when you need a partner the most. But
yeah,
I'm glad you had a chill baby.
Yeah. Honestly, like it was the coughing for me that was the worst because I didn't really have any symptoms except that cough. But right after pushing a baby out, I felt like my pelvic floor was going to fall out.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That is not fun. No. Oh my gosh. All right. Well, any resources you want to share?
Most of the typical ones that are recommended. I really love Ina May's books, especially The Guide to Childbirth. Mm-hmm. Birth Hour, of course. For postpartum, the first 40 days, I love to recommend. The first half really talks about just setting yourself up for a great postpartum. And then the second half is just recipes if you're looking to make freezer meals or have things prepared. I love that book. And then some other of like my favorite podcasts, which I'll have in the show notes, the Birthful podcast, Birthing Instincts with Dr. Stu and Bliss, and Down to Birth podcast are some of my favorites.
All right. That's a good little list there. And then where can people reach out to you to connect?
So I am on Instagram at the Doula Dietitian. And you can also go to my website, thedouladietitian.com.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for sharing, Megan.
Great. Thank you so much for having me, Bryn.
Now I'm going to chat with the co-founders of Nurture by Naps, Emily and Jamie. Hi, Emily and Jamie. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast to chat with me about naps.
We're so happy to be here, Bryn. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Awesome. Well, can you just tell me a little bit about yourselves and how you got involved and started naps?
Yeah. So we'll try and keep this short and sweet. We have a whole podcast episode on just how we started.
I know. Yeah.
I'm Jamie O'Day. I'm a registered nurse. I'm an international board certified lactation consultant, also known as an IBCLC. I have 3 daughters. They are 9, 7, and 5. And I am the co-founder of NAPS, which stands for Newborn and Parenting Support. We'll talk a little bit more about what we do in just a second here. But I founded NAPS with my business partner, Emily.
Yeah. Also turns out I'm your best friend as well. I am Emily Silver. It's so nice to be here. I am a family nurse practitioner, although my wheelhouse really is just moms and babies. And I'm also an IBCLC, a lactation consultant. And I have 3 girls as well. They are 9, 7, and 3.
All right. So what inspired you guys to start NAPS and what makes you different from other resources out there for prenatal and postpartum?
Yeah. So Emily and I worked on labor and delivery here in Boston. We worked at a major medical center teaching hospital here. While we were working on labor and delivery, anybody who has had a baby, which I know is a large population of your listeners, Bryn,
Yes.
knows that there is a massive gap in care for women and families. I mean, really starting prenatally, but especially postpartum. And we realized this gap in 2009, even before we had our own kids. We had just met and really wanted to do something about that gap in care. So brainstormed a lot of different ideas on the night shift and ultimately decided to start naps in 2011 because Emily and I didn't have any kids yet. We were two of the nurses who worked the shifts. We hired a handful of nurses. And at the time, the very first service that we ever provided to clients here in Massachusetts was daytime and overnight nursing care. So that's how we got started.
Yeah. I mean, it grew, it snowballed as we went on to, I became an NP. We started teaching, our careers evolved, but our families evolved also. We started having kids ourselves. And so that is sort of, our business grew from clients telling us what they needed or us experiencing it truly ourselves. I think, Jamie, you mentioned that we hired a bunch of nurses, and I think that answers the other piece of your question, Bryn, is what makes us different. At NAPS, whenever you engage with someone here on our team, you will always interact with a registered nurse or a nurse practitioner. We have other experts in our membership platform, from mental health to OT to PT. But, we found that parents are just piecemealing information together, going here and going there for this and for that. And we wanted to create a safe space where you can come to get an answer always from a medical expert. But we're also moms, as we already mentioned too. So we're always willing to bring in that real life parenting advice to help parents navigate their options and just bring it all together into one safe space.
Yeah, I think the one third that you'll see across all the services that we offer is that we saw a lack of the integration of the medical world and the real life parenting world.
Yeah.
So that's really what we wanted to bring to the table, was that aspect of it, that integration of those two worlds, while also providing high quality care from medical professionals, right? So that's one piece of it. And as Emily mentioned, the other piece of it is this idea of there's no reason why there can't be one place for people to go for all these different stages from pregnancy through potty training and the transition to preschool. So that's what we've really been trying to accomplish, is having one place with the same providers who have the medical background, but the real life experiences to be able to meet parents exactly where they're at and help them feel empowered and confident.
Right. And all of these services are available online to anyone. So you mentioned a membership. I would love to talk about that and what is offered with that.
Yeah. So membership's definitely, one of our signature offerings. That is where parents can come really at any stage of parenting to be able to get on-demand advice and support, again, from medical professionals, right? So within that membership, at a minimum, what's included in that is a video library with over, I think we're up to
150 at
least. 150
more.
different
we release it every month, more video content.
More content, yeah. So, cool. Short form videos to be able to answer those everyday common parenting questions.
If you're about to go to Google and put something in about spit up or weight gain or peeing at night, and when you're trying to potty train, something from babies to toddlers, you'll find a quick answer.
Yeah. So that's meant to replace the 3 a.m. Google rabbit hole.
We've all been down that one.
But in addition to that, we wanted touch points with our clients, right? So anybody who's a member can also come to one of our 3 weekly Q&As. During those Q&As, there is a registered nurse or a nurse practitioner online for an hour there to answer any of your pregnancy or parenting questions. And then we also have which is our most popular feature, it's an Ask a Nurse message board. So you can ask a question on that message board 24/7. You'll receive a response within 24 hours from an actual human being. This is not a bot. That's just at a minimum what you get on the Nurture membership. For people who do an annual membership, what's included in the annual membership are all things that we know through research that positively impact maternal child health outcomes. So all of your prenatal education, feeding support, sleep consultations, and then the peer support groups. So those are all individual services that you can book with us, but those are all also services that are included in the membership because we know through evidence, through research, that those things positively impact maternal child health outcomes too. And so just wanted them to be part of your experience with us.
I know. It's not cookie cutter, right? When you have a question about feeding, we're going to need to ask you about your routine and sleep and your home life. So I think too about the piece that we're nurses is we just love talking and asking questions. So we ask a lot of questions to help you get to your right answer. But you don't have to be a member to work with us either. You can try us out. You can try us on, right? You can jump on our website and even just book a service or a call just to see how it feels for you too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. And I love that you have that lactation support that can be offered virtually. And I know that even a lot of insurance policies will cover that as well.
Yeah. So one of the biggest updates that we've had as of late is we do now accept certain health insurance plans. So that is for people who want an in-person lactation visit. If you're here in Massachusetts, we're seeing a lot of our clients not even having to submit it themselves to get reimbursed. Like it's actually being covered by their insurance fully for them to just engage with us in person or online. So many of these insurance companies also offer unlimited telehealth appointments. So this is where we're really starting to, we already were reaching patients outside of Massachusetts with our virtual offerings, the membership, our online classes, support groups. But now with the insurance coverage, we're seeing more and more people virtually for that, either, through a remote, lactation visit, or because, this is something that's covered until us or the patient deems they no longer need help. We're sort of following these people for many weeks and answering those everyday feeding and sleep and newborn questions. So just really trying to make our services and our care more accessible to more people.
Yeah. You can jump in at any time if you're expecting a baby, if you have a newborn, a baby, or a toddler. Maybe you're having your second or your third baby. It's never too late to get involved in the journey.
I love that. And the way that I found out about you guys was through a guest who had been a member of one of your postpartum support groups, and that sounded amazing as well.
Yeah. So the peer support groups are an amazing offering, again, either as part of the membership or a one-off service that you can book. Those peer support groups are for all these stages too. So pregnant support group, we do a new mom support group, we do a veteran mom support group for seasoned moms, we do a working mom support group, we have a dad support group. So that is just peer support is such an integral part of your pregnancy and postpartum journey and just life as a parent.
Yeah.
So again, really just trying to make that service more accessible. And we're so thankful to Robin for mentioning.
I felt so proud listening to that episode, and you asked her, what her best resource was, and she said naps, and it just it was really nice to hear.
Yeah.
Amazing. Well, I love that you guys are just this hub for so many different things that come up during this stage of parenting. And I love that, it's available to everyone now. I think it's one of the things that kind of came out of COVID is we learned there's a lot more we can do virtually than what people were even trying to do before. So it's really cool.
Yeah, totally. It gives more people the option to have access to this level of care regardless of where you live. So
absolutely.
It feels really, really exciting. And it's just awesome to be able to support more people.
Yeah. And where is the best place for people to connect with you guys and find out about all these things?
Yeah, to just check us out, check out our services, try us on. If you want to book a call or join a class, you can go to our website, nurturebynaps.com. There's also information about our membership on there as well. Or if you use social media, we are very active on our Instagram account, which is Nurture by Naps. That is where we are constantly serving up education, put a question box out once a week, and we'll answer as many of your questions as we can to give you a taste of what it's like in the membership. And we just are very real. We don't make it look pretty. We show our real lives and our real selves with our own families to help you feel connected. Like we're in it just like you.
Yep.
Yeah. I love that. And I love that you guys have the, personal experience, but also the medical background. It feels like just, like the nurse line you might have at your pediatrician, but like 10 times better and more personal. So it's such a cool offering that you have.
Yeah.
There's also those weird questions that you want to ask your pediatrician, but you're like, I don't think I can call them. Like, I don't know that I would call them. And weird stuff that you're Googling that you're going to get crazy answers on Google. So
yeah. All right, perfect. Well, we will link to all of those things, and I will share on Instagram for sure, because your Instagram account has so many great infographics and information and everything. So I hope more people will follow you over there from our account. And I just really appreciate your time today.
Thanks so much, Brandon. We appreciate you having us.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much again to Megan for sharing her story with us. If you want more information from this episode, head over to thebirthhour.com and just search for Megan's name in the search bar to find her show notes page. We'll have all links there as well as linked in the podcast app where you're listening to this episode.
Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, head to thebirthhour.com and click Become a Member to pledge your support. And as a thank you, you'll get an invitation to join our private Facebook group and access to exclusive episodes. Your vote of confidence and support means the world to me.